Hi, my name is Karen Rafa. I'm here with Steve Durst from the International Lunar Observatory Association based in Hawaii. Steve, thank you so much for coming today.
Hey, good morning. My pleasure, Kareem.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Before we get into the depth of everything, can you please tell me a bit more about what you do at ILOA and how you got there?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm the director based in Hawaii Island and collaborate with our now 27 directors in 5 continents all over the world. We have 4 moon missions, and it's my responsibility to see that we establish them.
So I understand that you're trying to build an observatory on the moon, is that correct?
Yes.
So can you tell me a bit more about how that's different from, say, an orbital telescope?
Many astronomers would say, why go to the moon when you have the same atmosphere-free conditions in space? There are advantages on the moon over space in terms of servicing as the moon develops human settlement and the proximity nearby to service and upgrade the facilities on the moon. Also, the atmosphere is even clearer on the moon than in low Earth orbit. So there are some advantages over space observatories.
There have been less, it seems, moon missions in the past 10, 20 years.
Well, it has been 50 years, as I mentioned, Kareem, since the Apollo era missions, and for 15, 20 years after that, nothing went back. There was nothing in the 80s, nothing whatsoever. In the 90s, there were a few missions, robotic. Japan broke that long hiatus with a couple of small robotic exploratory missions, and then USA sent 2 missions up later in the 90s. In the new millennium, the new century, in the 2000s, there were a series of robotic orbiters from Europe, Japan, China, India, and USA. Now we're looking forward towards ultimately human return. USA has the 4th time. U.S. government has said we're sending Americans and others back to the moon.
So where's the value add you see in reestablishing this footprint on the moon, be it as a communication station or just simply as an 8th continent?
Well, exactly that. It is the 8th continent for development, and it is expanding human domains and operations commercially, scientifically, technically, socially, culturally, politically. And our International Lunar Observatory 1 has 2 main functions, observation and communications. And we see our mission as pioneering this 8th continent, returning ultimately humanity to another world before we go on to Mars and Europa and Titan, etc. There are observational firsts, and like any expedition, whether it's the Boy Scouts or the Marines or whatever, when you explore, you post a lookout. First thing you do, you look around, and that's what we are doing to enable subsequent activities, such as if you're an explorer, you post a lookout, and then you build a fire for power, you put up a tent for habitation. Our second major function, Kareem, after observation is communications, which will enable, I know one of the questions that you had listed was, what might this lead to? Commercial opportunities. Communications would be an obvious one.
What other commercial applications do you see other than the communications?
Well, observation, communications, power, energy, although I think the main uses of energy sources such as water, which is the new discovery and the vital element for opening up human settlement there, and water can be changed into rocket fuel. It can be broken down to hydrogen and oxygen, which is used to power rockets. So energy also, there is, besides water, there's an isotope called helium-3, which, if transportation can be lowered enough, could be transported back to Earth to power nuclear fusion reactors.
Some private companies such as SpaceX, I believe, were talking about orbital refueling stations for further otherworldly exploration. Would the moon be a viable station?
Well, yeah, it's a naturally made stop. And even SpaceX, there have been attempts by companies to open up the first $1 trillion industry by capturing asteroids, and some of them are pure gold, just about. Kraft Erica mentions in his very patriarchal terminology, he said, if God had wanted man to be a spacefaring species, God would have given man a moon. and it's there, and it does enable us almost as a backyard sandbox for youngsters to learn to navigate and walk
reach
around.
and just it's a dream too, right?
Well, to get your walking legs,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can go to Mars. And
So you were telling me the differences briefly between a lunar observatory and an orbital telescope that we already have today. What would be a sort of, say, astronomer wish list of what you could see from the moon that you can't see today?
well, that's a good question that we fretted and worked about for a couple of years. What do we look at first? What are the priorities? And a lot of astronomers on Hawaii, as I mentioned, 13 world-class observatories there. And we asked, 100 astronomers and got 101 suggestions. And we settled on something grand, inspirational, directional. Namely, the first view we want to take would be the first view of the Milky Way galaxy, the center of the Milky Way, our Milky Way, from the moon, with the idea, there's never been an image of the Milky Way from the moon. And we hope to get the first one with the idea that it may be as influential and inspirational as the view from the moon in the 20th century when Neil and Buzz went to the moon and looked back at Earth. That impact, we all know, that first view of Earth from the moon across the lunar surface catalyzed the entire, changed human perceptions of who we are, where we are, of the Earth. It led to the environmental ecology movement of the 60s and 70s, and we think that first image of the Milky Way galaxy from the moon, we'll go to the moon, look back not only at Earth, but look out towards the galaxy, our future.
What would we see in the center of the Milky Way from the moon that we haven't seen so far?
Well, again, the first image is with a very small telescope that the ILOA is, and we talked earlier that because of the 1/6 gravity on the moon, it would allow construction of very large telescopes, much larger than Hubble. And our second image after the Milky Way galaxy, and maybe stopping at various star clusters of galaxy as we pan the telescope down to catch the image of the Earth for meteorological weather observations and for scientific reasons measuring the rotation of the Earth, its speed. That is very valuable to know precisely for all kinds of aviation, scientific reasons.
It's very exciting times ahead. Can you give us an idea of the timeline and what milestones you're looking towards?
Yeah, sure. As I mentioned, we started with the International Lunar Observatory, which we call ILO-1, which is a 2-meter radio dish at the Malapert Mountain South Pole, along with optical refractors. And that is, depending on funding, we hope two years. ILO-X may land on the moon. The NASA administrator held a press conference today and said that there may be landings on the moon this year. I think it's a little optimistic, but we're hoping for 18 months with this precursor that would land at the easier to land equatorial area. Mm-hmm. And we'd still get the first light would be the Milky Way galaxy center. So that could be 18 months, the ILO-X precursor. The other precursor that we're already operating on the lunar surface through our cooperation with National Astronomical Observatories of China. We were able to direct their scientists to obtain the first image of a spiral galaxy from the moon. So that's, as they say, not many people are aware of it because it's Chinese and people have some issues with China, but it's a fact. And the fourth mission, besides the ILO-1, the precursor, the Chinese collaboration, is a human moon mission, which when people go back to the moon, perhaps earlier than 10 years, will be part of, too, a human moon mission. So that's the timeline for our 4 missions. our ILOA 1 in 2 to 3 years.
It's very exciting times ahead. Very exciting times.
Yeah.
Well, that's all the time we have today, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for watching.
Aloha.